Prostitution has existed for thousands of years. From the bustling streets of ancient Mesopotamia to the red light districts of modern cities, the exchange of sexual services for money has been one of the oldest forms of commerce known to humanity. And yet, despite its historical persistence, prostitution has been a deeply controversial subject. Many countries criminalize it entirely. Others allow limited forms such as regulated brothels, and some maintain a confusing mix of laws that vary region by region. But what if, in one massive global shift, every country in the world decided to legalize prostitution? What if sex work was treated as a legitimate profession everywhere, regulated and taxed just like any other occupation? The consequences, social, economic, cultural, and even political, would be enormous, and they would not all be positive. This is a scenario that would touch nearly every aspect of human life. First, we must understand what legalization would mean in this context. In many countries today, prostitution exists in a gray zone. Some places criminalize the act of selling sex but not buying it, or vice versa. Others criminalize both parties but turn a blind eye in practice. Full legalization, however, would mean that sex work is recognized as a lawful, regulated occupation. Workers would have labor rights, health and safety protections, and the ability to operate openly without fear of arrest. Governments could set standards, enforce health checks, and collect taxes. Legal brothels could operate under business licenses, and independent sex workers could advertise their services without facing legal repercussions. From an economic perspective, the most immediate change would be the emergence of a massive new legal industry. The global sex trade is already estimated to be worth hundreds of billions of dollars annually, but much of that operates underground, beyond the reach of taxation and oversight. With legalization, governments could bring these transactions into the official economy. This would mean a surge in taxable revenue. Some countries might use these funds to bolster public health systems, fund education, or invest in law enforcement. Others might channel the money into social programs designed to help people exit sex work if they choose to do so. In countries with struggling economies, the legalization of prostitution could become a significant source of income. Tourism would also be affected. Some nations might see an influx of visitors specifically seeking legal sexual services, similar to what happens today in places like the Netherlands or parts of Nevada. This sex tourism industry could bring both economic benefits and ethical debates about exploitation, consent, and the commodification of intimacy. From a labor rights standpoint, legalization could improve the lives of many sex workers. Today, because the industry is criminalized in most places, sex workers are often vulnerable to abuse, exploitation, and violence. They cannot report crimes without risking arrest themselves. They lack access to benefits like healthcare, retirement plans, or unemployment insurance. Legalization could change that. Workers could unionize, demand fair pay, and work in safe environments. Health checks could reduce the spread of sexually transmitted infections, and access to legal resources could empower workers to leave abusive situations. But while these benefits sound promising, the picture is far from universally positive. One of the biggest concerns is whether legalization would actually eliminate the illegal side of the industry. In reality, even in countries where prostitution is legal and regulated, such as Germany or the Netherlands, an illegal market still exists. Why? Because regulation often comes with costs, business licensing fees, mandatory health checks, and taxes that some workers or clients choose to avoid. This creates a parallel black market where exploitation can continue unchecked. Moreover, legalization could have complex effects on human trafficking. Some argue that regulation makes trafficking easier to detect and combat, since legal sex businesses must follow rules and submit to inspections. Others worry that legal prostitution could act as a cover for traffickers, making it harder to distinguish between voluntary and coerced sex work. Data from countries that have legalized prostitution suggests that trafficking rates do not automatically fall, and in some cases, they may rise. The cultural impact of worldwide legalization would also be profound. In more conservative societies, prostitution is not just illegal, it is considered deeply immoral, a violation of cultural or religious norms. Legalizing it in such contexts could trigger social unrest, protests, and political backlash. On the other hand, in more liberal or secular societies, legalization might be framed as a victory for personal freedom and bodily autonomy. The global nature of this hypothetical scenario means we'd see vastly different local reactions, with acceptance in some regions and fierce resistance in others. Another question is how legalization would reshape gender dynamics. The vast majority of sex workers today are women, and the majority of clients are men. This imbalance has long fueled debates about whether prostitution reinforces harmful gender stereotypes and power imbalances. Legalization might normalize the idea of purchasing sexual access, which critics argue could worsen misogyny or lead to increased objectification of women. Conversely, supporters contend that recognizing sex work as a job like any other removes stigma, empowers workers to set boundaries, and acknowledges their agency. Technology would undoubtedly transform a legalized global sex industry. Online platforms could openly connect clients and workers, integrating features like secure payment systems, background checks, and reviews. This could enhance safety and transparency. However, it could also make the industry even more competitive, potentially driving down prices and pushing vulnerable workers to accept riskier situations to remain competitive. AI-generated adult content and sex robots could also compete with human sex workers, raising questions about the future of intimacy, relationships, and the nature of sexual commerce itself. The public health implications would be significant. Legalization, paired with mandatory health checks and education, could dramatically reduce the transmission of STIs. Workers could be trained in safe practices, and clients could be required to provide proof of recent testing in some jurisdictions. Governments could integrate sexual health services into public clinics, reducing stigma and improving access. Yet, this assumes strong enforcement and adequate funding. In countries with weak regulatory systems, health protections might exist on paper but be ignored in practice. The psychological and social effects on sex workers themselves would vary. For some, legalization would mean freedom, stability, and dignity. For others, it might not change the core challenges of the job: emotional strain, societal stigma, and physical risks. Stigma is especially resilient. Even if prostitution became legal worldwide, it would still carry moral judgments in many communities. That stigma can isolate workers, affect their mental health, and limit their opportunities outside the industry. Another consideration is how legalization would intersect with broader societal issues like poverty and inequality. Many people enter sex work out of economic necessity, not choice. Legalization might improve conditions, but it wouldn't erase the economic pressures that lead people into the industry in the first place. If anything, by making prostitution more visible and accessible, legalization could make it easier for struggling individuals to see sex work as a quick way to earn money, potentially increasing participation. From a law enforcement perspective, legalizing prostitution would free up resources currently spent on policing and prosecuting sex work. Police could focus on serious crimes such as trafficking, assault, and exploitation. However, the success of such a shift would depend heavily on how well regulations are enforced. Corruption, underfunding, or lack of political will could undermine these efforts. Globally, a fully legalized sex industry could create new forms of international trade. Workers might migrate to countries with more lucrative markets, creating sex work hubs, similar to how certain regions become centers for technology or finance. This could generate geopolitical tensions, particularly if wealthier countries attract workers from poorer nations. Labor protections would be essential to prevent exploitation, but history suggests that ensuring such protections across borders would be extremely challenging. Religious institutions would likely become vocal opponents of worldwide legalization. In many cultures, religious teachings form the foundation of laws against prostitution. Legalization could be framed as an attack on moral values, leading to political mobilization, and even the reversal of such laws in some countries. In democratic nations, public opinion could swing heavily based on moral arguments, creating ongoing political battles over regulation, taxation, and the limits of personal freedom. On the flip side, some advocacy groups would celebrate legalization as a human rights victory. They would point to sex work as legitimate labor and argue that criminalizing it only makes workers more vulnerable. These groups might push for global labor standards for sex work, similar to how there are international standards for industries like shipping or aviation. Ultimately, a world where prostitution is fully legalized would not be a utopia. It would be a world of trade-offs: economic benefits alongside moral dilemmas, improved safety alongside persistent exploitation risks, reduced stigma for some alongside continued judgment for others. The key determinant of whether legalization would improve lives would be the quality of regulation, the strength of enforcement, and the broader social systems in place to support people's choices. In the best-case scenario, full legalization could lead to safer working conditions, reduced violence, improved public health, and new economic opportunities. In the worst-case scenario, it could expand trafficking networks, deepen gender inequalities, and commercialize human intimacy on a scale never before seen. Like many social policies, the outcome would depend not just on the letter of the law, but on the society implementing it. In this imagined future, one thing is certain: the legalization of prostitution worldwide would force humanity to confront uncomfortable questions about morality, commerce, and the nature of human relationships. And whether we view it as liberation, exploitation, or something in between, it would change the way we think about sex, work, and power forever.